It holds the record of being the largest aircraft to fly in the world. It weighs over a staggering 550 tons. It's so huge that the Wright brothers' first flight could have taken place in the cargo bay. Its 6 engines produce over 300,000 pounds of thrust, making it the world's most powerful aircraft. It's one of a kind. The Antonov 225. This gigantic jet has dimensions that defy belief. It also seems to defy gravity as it lifts its massive bulk into the skies. It's so big that even the man in charge of flying it doubted it could get off the ground.
The first time I saw the aircraft in the assembly hangar, I said, it is not possible. It is not possible that this aircraft can be airborne.
It has a wingspan of 88 meters. The diameter of the fuselage is 19 meters. It stands over 18 meters high. This aircraft is so immense that one tractor alone can't pull it. 2 heavy-duty tractors are required to tow it from the hangar to the airfield. All these measurements add up to one simple distinction. The Antonov 225 is the largest jetliner in the world. This 6-engine Goliath is the heavyweight champion of the skies. It's a jet so long that it would barely be able to squeeze between the goalposts on a football field. To put it into perspective, the Antonov 225 dwarfs the most prolific jetliner in the world, the Boeing 737. And at 84 meters long, the Antonov 225 is 14 meters longer than the largest passenger jet, the Boeing 747-400. When it comes to lifting heavyweight cargo, only a few aircraft in the world can handle the loads. The US Air Force's C-17 Globemaster can lift 85 tons. The mighty C-5A Galaxy lumbers through the sky with up to 135 tons. But when it comes to mega loads, the Antonov aircraft from the Ukraine are in a class of their own. The Antonov 124, the 225's little brother, as if anything this big can be called little, packs an incredible 150 tons plus of cargo lifting might.
The 225 is the next order of magnitude. It has a 250-ton capacity, and the 225 is capable of carrying up to 250 tons externally on the roof.
The reason that the 225 is the heavy lifting champion is its cargo hold. Its interior is so cavernous that 8 average-sized houses could be stacked inside. It's a jet so enormous that those who stood in its massive shadow have dubbed it the aluminium overcast. But being the world's largest isn't the only thing that sets this Soviet-built jet apart. The Antonov 225 is unique. In fact, this is the only one in existence today. The 225 also has a unique story. A tale of creation, desolation, and then a phoenix-like rebirth from the economic ashes of the former Soviet Union. The saga surrounding this one-of-a-kind jet sets it apart from all other aircraft. The Antonov 225 evolved out of the intense competition with the United States in the race for space. The aircraft was built in the Ukraine in 1988 to carry the Soviet space shuttle. The 36-meter-long shuttle nestled comfortably on its broad shoulders and was dwarfed by the craft designed to transport it. Unfortunately for the 225, size wasn't everything. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and by 1991, the Soviet Union was history. Not even size could save the Antonov 225 from the economic woes of a country in transition. Their space program was cancelled, and this awe-inspiring jet was decommissioned and demoted to the biggest scrap heap in the world.
They parked the aeroplane in a corner of the test facility at Gostomel, and they were watching this wonderful asset falling into disrepair.
It would be nearly a decade before the mighty Antonov 225 would defy the odds and fly again. The world's largest aircraft carries the name of its creator, the name of a man whose passion for flight began in the days when Tsar Nicholas II ruled Russia, and aviation science was in its infancy. A man who would eventually become a hero in a nation that didn't yet exist. Oleg Konstantinovich Antonov was born on February the 7th, 1906, near Moscow, just 3 years after the Wright brothers made their famous flight at Kitty Hawk. As his country weathered World War I and then the Russian Revolution, the young Antonov turned his head to the clouds. He collected World War I airplane parts, and this fascination with flight led him to design his first glider.
Oleg Antonov built his first flying machine in 1923 in age 17. It was glider. It was not very successful glider, but during next 15 years, Oleg Antonov built a lot of gliders which were on the world scale and keep some Soviet and world records.
Antonov studied engineering at the Leningrad Polytechnic Institute and graduated in 1930. He then worked as chief of design at various Soviet factories, developing more than 30 types of gliders.
He was very talented engineer, and especially in aerodynamics. During the Second World War, Oleg Antonov, he was deputy chief designer for Mr. Yakovlev, a famous fighter designer, but it was not enough for him. On his free time, if he had free time, he designed his own construction, and one of that was famous in future Antonov 2 biplane.
This little plane, the Antonov 2, displayed outside his Kiev office, is the one that eventually would lead him towards the heavy-duty cargo jets that bear his name today.
Project was supported by Mr. Yakovlev and by Ministry of Aviation Industry. And the first prototype was built in Kiev factory and flew in 1946. Aircraft was good, successful, and government designed to start big-scale production.
Antonov established his own design bureau in Kiev. His objective was to construct a plane that would withstand the rigors of flight all over the vast Soviet Union, something that could dust crops in the Ukraine as well as deliver mail to the frozen wastes of Siberia. 18,000 of these workhorses were built, and many still continue to do their jobs today. It was Antonov's talent to design aircraft that perfectly fulfilled Soviet needs that led to a friendship with Nikita Khrushchev and some status in the USSR. Not just anybody gets an office like this in the Soviet Union. Antonov's office is preserved like a shrine and is packed with vintage Cold War-era trappings. Secret recorders, complex communication systems, and hidden panels all reveal the low-tech tricks of the engineering trade, and all speak volumes about Oleg Antonov and his vital role in Soviet aviation. From this office, Antonov continued to design planes, and those planes kept getting bigger and bigger. Thanks to this man, the Ukraine holds the little-known distinction of consistently producing the biggest planes in the world. The world's first wide-bodied aircraft was developed in 1965, the Antonov 22. To this day, the Antonov 22 remains the largest turboprop in the world. Approximately 100 of these massive military transport planes were produced. Then came the ironically named little brother to the biggest jet in the world. The Antonov 124. The 124 owes its whale-like shape to its function. It was developed in the mid-1970s as a strategic air transporter for the Soviet military to carry missiles and tanks. With its 73-meter wingspan and 69-meter length, it easily captured the record for the largest production aircraft in the world. Over 60 of these jets have been built, and Oleg Antonov led the initial design work. Within the government, there were some conflicts of opinion on design, but Antonov prevailed. Notable features of his giant creation were thicker wings than its predecessors, providing more lift and fuel capacity. The aircraft had nose and tail cargo doors, allowing vehicles to drive in one side and out the other. The jet had the ability to kneel down on its undercarriage, making for easier front loading, and had its own internal crane to pick up cargo at the rear, carry it straight into the aircraft, and place it where desired. The 124 excelled at going where jets usually don't go. It can use its gigantic landing gear to nimbly touch down anywhere it's needed, even on unpaved runways.
The Antonov 124 is capable of landing successfully on primitive runways. It has even landed in the polar region on frozen airstrips when we used to transport supplies to that region.
The first prototype flew in December 1982. By 1984, the airliner was in production. The same year, her creator, Oleg Antonov, died at the age of 78. The desk calendar in his office is still open at that date. Oleg Antonov's legacy to build big was reflected throughout the Soviet Union. Bigger was always better. From statues to helicopters, largeness reigned supreme. Since the Cold War, competition with the West was fierce, and Antonov's designers always strived to outdo the Americans.
I remember that all time we compete with United States in transport aircraft. United States built Hercules, we built Antonov 12, we built Antonov 22, United States built C5, we built Antonov 124, and after that we built just Antonov 225. And I don't know, maybe American, United States don't need bigger plane, and they do not build anything more bigger than Antonov 225.
Nowhere was the competition more intense than the race for space. The Soviets were developing their own space shuttle called Buran, which means snowstorm. In design, it looked similar to America's space shuttle. Soviet engineers had attempted to design something different, but in the end, a straight aerodynamic copy was selected. There were, however, significant differences. Buran had no main engines, so it had more payload capacity. It also relied entirely on external rocket boosters to achieve orbit, allowing it 4 times greater lifting power for cargo. Unlike America's shuttle with main engines, external tank and solid fuel boosters, Buran used liquid fuel boosters that were throttle controlled and could be turned on and off to avoid blow-up disasters like the 1986 Challenger tragedy. By the mid-80s, the Soviet shuttle program had fallen behind schedule, and they were desperate to keep up with America's program. The Soviets lacked a vehicle large enough to transport Buran, so in 1985, design began on the Antonov 225.
It was necessary to create and design a system and vehicle to carry the space shuttle from the manufacturing plants of the Soviet Union, which are located a long distance from the launch pad.
The Soviets wanted this plane built fast and on a tight budget.
We had very, very strict requirements to construct this aircraft as quickly as we could and with as little expense. It was all due to the fact that the United States already had their space shuttle and the USSR lagged behind.
The pressure was on for the Antonov Design Bureau.
So they decided to modernize the Antonov 124, to upgrade it, and use the 124's existing assemblies and parts to create a bigger, more effective jet for the purpose of moving the shuttle.
Nicknamed Mriya, the Russian word for dream, the Antonov 225 grew from the technology that had built its little brother, the Antonov 124.
Looking at the 225, you can see that it has many similarities to the Antonov 124. There is a commonality between the two aircraft. The cross-section is identical to the Antonov 124. The wing panels of the 225 are actually identical to the 124. And the engines are the same as Antonov 124. There are 6, though, instead of 4.
But using the 124's existing technology was not enough. Radical design changes had to be made, most of them to do with size and power.
There was a change of the tail unit. It's a twin fin tail to compensate for carrying Buran on top of the aircraft. There is no aft cargo door because of the length of the fuselage, and we increased the number of rear landing gear struts. We have 7 on each side for the Antonov 225, with a total of 32 tires, including front landing gear.
The designers at Antonov in Kiev were only given 3.5 years to design this gigantic new jet and get it off the ground. Initially, the task seemed insurmountable. The engineers couldn't even find a place big enough to build the aircraft.
It was a problem to find a location to construct the aircraft. for it would not fit in any existing facility. At first, we had to build the fuselage in parts and store the parts at angles to fit them inside the shop.
Due to Soviet bureaucracy, at one point the Antonov 225's designers had more jet than hangar.
In the USSR at the time, it was more complicated to construct a new building than a new jet. We used to construct aircraft in those days quicker than buildings, and we had to build the 225 so rapidly it grew faster than the building we were making it in.
But its size was continuing to cause other problems. The 225 was designed to transport gigantic cargoes, and the jet needed to be able to land.
We encountered great problems with landing gear. We faced the problem of creating the aircraft with a takeoff weight of 600 tons that would also be capable of landing on unprepared airfields. The landing gear had to be made so that it would not break the runway.
The designers came up with a solution. A massive bank of landing gear on the Antonov 225 that puts 18-wheel trucks to shame. Its 32 tires burn rubber every time this 600-ton behemoth touches down. There were other challenges as well. One of these only came to light when the jet was nearly complete.
When the aircraft was constructed, it turned out that it wasn't possible to install the Buran on top of it. We had no cargo handling equipment back then, and the crane on the field was not able to install it. So engineers quickly designed a special crane to lift the Buran 60 feet onto the 225's back.
But the 225's designers finally overcame the difficulties associated with their massive aircraft and met their deadline. With pomp and circumstance, the aircraft was rolled out of the hangar. Now it was time to prove that this six-engine giant could fly. The Antonov design team had met the strict Soviet government deadline for the 225.
It was a tradition in those days to finish the tasks by the end of the year. The aircraft flew first on December 1st, 1988.
Those who had initially thought that flying the Antonov 225 would be impossible suddenly experienced a change of heart as the aircraft began its historic first flight.
We started to test the aircraft on taxiway. Next, trial runs on the runway, and finally, the first maiden flight. And when it took to the air, I saw that flying the 225 was absolutely possible, and it was incredible.
Everyone who had worked on the jet felt a deep affection for it, from designers to test pilots.
I felt very, very proud when I first saw it take off. It was a joyous time. My name is Alexander Galunenko. I'm the leading test pilot of the Antonov 225 aircraft. Of course I enjoy this job. It is like no other, a real challenge. This aircraft is absolutely one of a kind.
But would the mighty 225 fly with a 90-ton shuttle strapped to its back? Within months of its maiden flight, the Antonov 225 broke 109 world records for range, altitude, and cargo capabilities. Finally, in 1989, the aircraft accomplished the mission it was designed for. It flew with the 90-ton Soviet space shuttle, the Buran, attached to it externally for the very first time.
It is very, very hard to express how I felt. Proud. I felt joy. I was in some euphoric state. I was overcome with joy when it flew with the orbiter. Everyone was.
With the Buran attached to its back, the Antonov 225 made its debut before a worldwide audience at the 1989 Paris Air Show. The gargantuan jet stole the show.
Well, I remember Paris in 1989 when all the other aircraft at the show had almost no visitors, but there was a long line of people standing around our craft wanting to visit it.
The Antonov 225's bulk and strength quickly captured the imagination of the world. There were even proposals to turn the Antonov into a flying cruise ship.
There were a lot of bizarre proposals on the part of very wealthy and rich people abroad. It was suggested to make it a flying hotel, with rooms and suites on the upper deck. And on the lower deck, there were swimming pools and casinos.
They even worked out how many people could fly aboard this recreational fantasy.
It is technically feasible that the jet could carry 1,500 people.
The largest capacity passenger jet in flight today is the Boeing 747-400. It carries 524 passengers when fully loaded. With modifications, the Antonov 225 could carry almost 3 times as many people. The Buran only ever made one space flight, and the 225 had only been airborne for a few short years when an event took place that changed the world forever. It also grounded all grandiose dreams about the future of this giant jet.
In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the Soviet Union's space program, which included this aircraft, lost its financing.
Boris Yeltsin cancelled the Soviet space program due to lack of funds. And for another reason, its project manager was one of the planners of the attempted 1991 coup. The King of the Skies became a hulking derelict, its parts cannibalized for other jets. The only Antonov 225 in the world was being slowly plundered, sacrificed bit by bit, to help save the company that had built it from economic ruin.
It was grounded because of lack of funds, and it stayed idle for 8 years.
With the fall of the Soviet Union, the Antonov Design Bureau was facing bankruptcy. In order to stay in business without government money, they turned to their fleet of giant airliners.
We began marketing the main aircraft in our fleet, the Antonov 124, which allows us to carry outsized and heavy cargo.
Creating Antonov Airlines, they formed a partnership with a London-based company that handles the booking of orders, scheduling, and flight routing. Together, they filled a niche using the Antonov's ultra-jumbo jets that no one else could. Their major Western competitors use 747s, but they aren't large enough to handle bulky, outsized cargo. Before long, the Antonov was transporting everything from power station generators to motor racing crews, cars and equipment to points all over the world.
Oh, it's pretty well a case of you name it, we've carried it. Personally, my favourite is the railway locomotive that we took complete from Canada to Ireland a few years ago. That set a world record for the largest commercial payload. It was 109 tonnes. The sort of psychological concept of putting a railway engine in the aeroplane is well, mind-blowing.
Cargo is airlifted when it's not possible to transport it by ship. Many locations are landlocked, or in some cases the local roads are not large enough or strong enough to accommodate enormous loads travelling to and from ports. The aircraft also buys time.
Time is money in any project, and the aeroplane allows you to buy time. If you plan to use the aeroplane from the beginning of your project, you can use the time that the aeroplane has bought you in your shipping schedule from the end of the project at any stage during the life of the project. So you can buy additional design time, you can buy additional testing time, you can buy additional production time. So there's a plus side to using the aeroplane quite often.
Planning is crucial when the cargo is oversized or overweight. Computers help determine how the cargo will be loaded in the aircraft. And plotting the route can be challenging. Flying huge cargo drinks up a lot of fuel, and several refueling stops are usually required. It all starts with an old-school trick.
Initially, we do use a globe, a piece of string, and so if I was going from, say, the United Kingdom over to India, then I could see from that straight line or great circle route that we would be operating through just the Ukraine, over through Iran, into Pakistan and India, so we could select our technical stops from that simple bit of navigation.
The technical stops are for refueling.
The airplane, because it's so big and fat, has quite a lot of drag attaching to it. That means it needs a lot of power, and that means it tends to burn a lot of fuel, and the fuel is the most expensive item. We'll burn, depending on the part of the world that we've picked the fuel up in, we'll burn $4,000 or $5,000 worth of fuel every hour, guaranteed.
Transformed from a giant of the Cold War to a commercial giant, this aircraft is ready for the rigorous reality of hauling heavy cargo around the globe.
Well, one of the major hurdles is actually the diplomatic clearances. A lot of the countries that we fly over or into need to be assured that we're not going to have any difficulties, and so that generally requires a bit more time in preparation. And normally we need about 14 days advance notice of any flight before we can actually operate that flight. The sheer weight of the aeroplane does cause not concern, but does require a lot of planning. We have to take into consideration the bearing strength of the runway, and maybe that's okay for the Antonov 124, but not for the 225.
The ground operations can cause problems too.
We also have to consider the fact that the wingspan of the aeroplane is 84 meters, and there are 6 engines, so fully laden with fuel, there is quite a severe bend in the wings, and we have to make sure that we've got all the clearances in place for the airfield, so we don't hit the obstructions on the sides of the runways.
Remarkably, the biggest aircraft in the world don't need the biggest runways in the world. These jets can touch down in limited spaces. The 124 can even land on grass fields, making the aircraft popular in Africa. Its size can also save lives. It once packed 452 Ethiopian refugees into its bulk and flew them to safety. By the late 1990s, the company was receiving requests to carry loads weighing more than 150 tons, which was the maximum carrying capacity of the Antonov 124.
We gained enormous experience in the commercial service and operation of the 124, and we came to the conclusion that there is a range of even bigger cargoes than the 124 can hold.
Opportunity was calling for the 225 and its massive capacity. But it was rusting in a nearby field. The company managers realized perhaps it could fill the demand of lifting mega loads.
All of this heavy cargo can be easily carried by the Antonov 225, and management of our company chose to refurbish this aircraft after years of being grounded.
The Antonov design team decided to return the airliner to the skies, and they set an ambitious goal: The mighty Antonov 225 would make its second debut at the Paris Air Show. But after sitting idle for 8 years, the 225 would need extensive restoration before it could fly again. Suddenly, it was déjà vu all over again, as the original builders, designers and pilots of this massive craft were called upon to get it ready for its resurrection.
Now we are facing the problem of certifying the aircraft. We plan to certify it for civil purposes, which means we have to replace some military systems with civilian ones for safety reasons.
The decade-old aircraft had to be treated like it was brand new because the 225 had never been certified. It had never been proven safe to fly. Earlier flights, even the one with the Soviet shuttle on its back, were all military test flights. Now, this giant needed even more trials to prove it met international aviation standards before it would receive certification for commercial flight.
The main part of the certification was done in 1989, but after the Soviet Union collapsed, the process was stopped. So there are about 8 to 10 flights left to finish certification, and we are going to do those flights and get the certification for this aircraft.
The jet also needed to be brought up to date. Engineers installed modern navigation and telemetry equipment and a new Honeywell communication system. The aircraft flies with a crew of 17 and their cabins received upgrades. New, stricter noise regulations had to be met, and incredibly, the aircraft had to be strengthened.
We had to reinforce the primary structure, especially the floor and nose section of the fuselage, so that the aircraft could be able to transport the large and heavy cargoes weighing up to 250 tons.
Every one of these improvements would prepare the big jet for the work ahead.
There is special ground maintenance work now in progress before our first flight after its long stay on the ground.
The 225 received 6 new Ukrainian-built engines that together produce over 300,000 pounds of thrust, or 1.5 million newtons. For maximum lift and range, the jet must carry 280 tons, or 288,000 litres of fuel, an amount that would fill over 6,000 average-sized cars. The 225 needs a lake of fuel. It burns it at the staggering rate of 18 tons an hour. And depending on the weight of the load, it has a potential range of over 12,000 kilometers. That's the distance between New York and Hong Kong. Before any pilot makes this big bird stretch its 88-meter wingspan, he must prepare for some of the idiosyncrasies of flying such a craft.
Of course, there are some difficulties, moments a pilot must be prepared for. For example, the big wingspan means there are moments that the aircraft resists acceleration.
The wings are so enormous they effectively must lift themselves first and then the aircraft. Consequently, any change in flight speed can be tricky for the crew. And the high-rise cockpit means that the pilot is perched so high in the air during landings that what he sees isn't necessarily what he gets.
There are difficulties with landing big aircraft, like the 124 or Boeing 747. The same thing happens here on the 225. For example, the eyes of the pilot are about 10 meters off the ground when landing, so he has to rely on instruments to land instead of what he sees.
Maximum takeoff weight for this muscular jet is a staggering 580 tons, the equivalent weight of 8 Boeing 737s lifting off. But big aircraft do not need big pilots to fly them.
No, it's quite curious. Everyone who sees the aircraft for the first time has asked me that question. It seems there should be a big man, a big pilot, to operate this big aircraft. But actually any pilot, large or small, who receives training could operate the Tu-25. It doesn't require a big pilot.
Sometimes, though, a wide palm or an extra helping hand is required to throttle up all 6 engines at once. Within a year of rescuing the Tu-25 from the scrap heap, the plane was ready. But could the jet that had been created for Cold War competition be reborn as a capitalist tool? Now it was time for the Tu-25 to prove itself again with a test flight. Over $20 million had been spent upgrading the Antonov Tu-25. And in April 2001, after being grounded for 8 years, the 6-engine Goliath powered up and lifted off on its second maiden flight. With the world's largest cargo plane flying again, the Antonov Design Bureau made plans to take every advantage of the Tu-25. The aircraft's potential is not just the weight of cargo it can carry, but the size of that cargo. Its 43-meter-long hold could swallow up the entire fuselage of a Boeing 737. Engineers are now studying the Tu-25 as a possible way to move 737 airframes to and from various manufacturing plants thousands of kilometers apart. And the jet is unique in that it can carry cargo on top, as it did with the Soviet shuttle. Being designed now are aerodynamic modules that will ride on top of the aircraft where the shuttle used to go. These will carry items too bulky for the Tu-25's immense cargo hold. A month after its maiden flight, the aircraft was finally certified. In a grand ceremony attended by Ukraine President Kuchma, the aircraft received its certification for commercial operation. A few weeks later, their hard work paid off. They achieved their ambition.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Bourget Airfield.
The Antonov Tu-25 arrived at the Paris Air Show, and as before, the mighty jet fascinated all who saw it. But this time, the Tu-25 represents commerce instead of cosmonauts. No Soviet space shuttle was mounted with the external suspension on the back of the aircraft. Instead, the Antonov crew were busily networking in hopes of eventually carrying other countries' goods in their one-of-a-kind creation. When the Antonov 225 eventually thundered down the runway and took to the skies, the people of the Paris Air Show were not just witnessing the rebirth of the biggest jet in the world. They were seeing a handful of workers from the former Soviet Union take flight into a new economic world.
The feelings for me are not that much different from the feelings from its first flight. I feel proud for the Antonov company and glad that in these difficult times we have managed to find the resources to put this aircraft in operation again.
The Antonov 225's resurrection at the air show was an unqualified success. 13 years since its first flight, the 225 had returned to its former glory. Transformed from a giant of the Cold War to a commercial giant, this massive aircraft is ready for the rigorous duty ahead of hauling heavy cargo around the globe.